My crew, my dogs, set rules, set laws. We represent for the lords of yards. A gal alone, I feel up my. From them a par in a chichi man can. If the fire make we burn them. From them a drink in a chichi man bar. If the fire make we burn them. Yeah. So make us up. Do you see what I see?
Hello, Shem, and welcome to the Chichi Man episode.
Hi, Rush. What a way to start a gay rights episode. No matter how many rights we get, that song will remain a banger. Even the name of this episode was a point of contention for Rashid, not I. I was going to call this the queer episode, the LGBT community episode. He had a problem with two of those words so far. But why wouldn't we going to call it the queer episode? You wanted it to just be the gay episode.
Yeah, because gay and queer is not the same thing. Queer is a negation of being gay is an absolute term that has a fixed format. The entire origin term queer was to add chaos to the entire discourse of what counts as a particular sexual identity. Queer is nothingness. Gay is a very specific thing. So I don't think about queer rights. That's not a real thing. There's no such thing as LG, two-spirit. That's not a thing either. There's no community of that sort. The letters contradict themselves in terms of rights acquisition. I'm sure we'll get into in this episode. For example, the rights of T and often the ideology of transsexual ideology, not always, but often, contradict some of the progress that gay men have made to make the Western world a bit more palatable for gay lifestyles. So I don't use those terms are actually counterproductive. In fact, perhaps even harmful.
I see. Now, we are gathered here today to have a frank discussion on we're not going to call it a movement. It's a loose collection of organizations, some recognized, some not recognized, that are supposed to be pushing a common narrative, and that is rights in the Caribbean, and if they have succeeded in those rights. Now, as you know, the Caribbean region has buggery laws abound. Then there's no gay marriage. There's very little in terms of recognition for gay unions throughout the region for most of the islands. Several islands still have buggery laws on the books, including Jamaica, St. Vincent, St. Lucia. Some of them have only just recently overturned their buggery laws, their anti-sodomy laws. This means, guys, no butt stuff. No, but it's illegal. Someone's going to rappel through your window and drag you on the street going, look at them. But Barbados recently overturned theirs. Trinidad and Tobago also joined in on some of because we all want the butt stuff. Just joined in on the fun. And it hasn't gone any farther. We've gotten nowhere from that point. And there's nothing to really say. Technically speaking, the LGBTQ organizations in Barbados had very little to do with the actual overturning of that law. It was due to a domestic case, of course, between one citizen who voiced their concerns and successfully argued it was unconstitutional for this law to remain on the books. But Barbados as a country really is not having that conversation. And there's no one pushing the actual necessary conversation, the narrative of those civil rights, despite having all these so-called LGBTQ rights organizations smattered all over the place. We've got Equals, and in Barbados at least, we were aware of Equals and Be Glad and those sorts of things. You're looking at me so strangely. You have no idea, do you?
I know Equals.
Okay, in Jamaica, you have J-Flag, and there are much more across the region. I think we can safely assume they have failed in their pseudo-purpose. What should be a common, because they're not all unified, as they should be. They've failed in their pseudo-purpose, and we really want to get to the meat of why they have failed, and what rhetoric they probably should. What's the solution? Like, where should we be going from here?
So, in one respect, I agree they failed in the general clause, but I don't know if they really had very specific objectives to move things forward. Now, I know many people from there will hear this and get very upset very fast. Oh my goodness. But I think when you really go to the core of it, there wasn't any directionality in policy proposals or legal plumbing proposals from these organizations. Like, people who were sympathetic to the organizations that would have these goals, but that's not the same thing. And very oftentimes, these organizations are a lot more, again, counterproductive in the social context we live in than they can even grasp because of they're so thoroughly entrenched in West Coast, East Coast, US ideology of what counts as popular culture in quote-unquote gay communities, a term I think is, again, very toxic.
Now, these organizations in question, you just mentioned they lack a goal.
Mm-hmm.
But one could also argue that it seems that they're more organized counterparts in the more northern developed United States and want to also seem to lack a goal. We had a conversation on this recently, the end of gay rights, which sounds like Armageddon for the rainbow community, but that's not what we mean. What we mean when we say the end of gay rights is, what is the end goal? What does the achievement of gay rights look like in the end? And does that, as we've ascertained, that does not necessarily include trans rights as well. They're not the same thing.
And that's why I think people don't always agree with that. Yeah, the idea of what's the end of gay rights. Literally, I use that term in the double entendre of end, is in the destination of gay rights, but also can it be squashed to a point where it can't actually get to that destination in the future. So oftentimes the first question you should ask is, what is the destination? You can't just assume it's always a fight, it's always a struggle, it's always chaos needed to bring to the center. That's not realistic. Again, that is, however, how many people do think about this issue. There's no end goal. They don't have an end goal in mind. Oftentimes, I think the end goal is it's not a very fair categorization, but often what I categorize as San Francisco gays or SF gays, and then Washington DC gays or DC gays. And I use that, again, it's tongue-in-cheek in many ways, in the sense that SF gays are the people who generally have a much more chaotic identity. They are very more public in terms of trying to differentiate gayness from heterosexuality. So they have like specific shows they like, specific party arrangements. They go to circuit parties. They dress a particular outlandish way or a sexually charged way. It's what a person would stereotype a gay man as, essentially. No, I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. People like that. And people as adults can do what you want. I am fully on board with the adult train here. In contrast, you have the DC gay, which is, generally speaking, a couple gay man grows up not super left-wing politically ideology-wise. They often get married. They have a family. They might do non-family things. They might have, for example, different sexual variety household management in some ways. But they're very private. They don't dress any outlandish way. They have typical government jobs. They go home. They don't really participate too much in gay activities. And I mean that in broad the stereotype of cultural speaking. They don't know who RuPaul is, so on and so on.
They have exited the gay conversation.
In many ways, as I said, I have the right to get married. I can adopt children. I am done with the gay rights thing, to put it crudely. I've exited it. I am now just a fellow American who has a husband, maybe some children. And I use DC as the polarity to SF, primarily because DC has the highest proportion of gay and married men of any state in the US. Yes, I know DC is not a state, but the point remains. So you can see a city, for example. And that's why I use that as the crude categories of what these people are. And these people are not in the gay conversation. They think, we have ended this into the legal plumbing for more or less in the US. Where on the SF gay side, they're still going. They keep adding in letters. They keep adding in concepts. And very often these things clash. For example, a feminine gay boy, oftentimes by SF gays, not all, but again, these are crude categories, SF gays, you are actually a trans woman. You're not a feminine boy. You should transition to be a woman. It's always funny because the transsexual ideology, radical stuff, is actually it's a lot more gender stereotypical than the gay community. You can't have a feminine boy. He's also a girl. That's what the old Christians, the very harsh renewalists or Puritan Christians would say, you can't have effeminate boys, it's a girl. Or what in Iran, they would have a situation where if you do have a feminine boy or a gay boy, they would actually push them to become a trans woman because that's more palatable in their society. And similarly, now we are adopting that same kind of concepts where it's now more palatable not to make the world safe for feminine gay boys or feminine men. It's to say, no, you can't be a feminine man. You are a woman. And that is a direct clash in many ways to the entire purpose of having the world safe for gay men. And that is, to me, the fundamental clash between the end of gay rights across these which are not communities. These are different groups of people that have different end goals with different interests, and we need to start pretending that they're all the same thing.
What I'm getting here is that the gay rights movement, I can actually refer to the one from the United States as a movement, has reached the finish line.
Not No, it's not every single possible thing is done.
It's not all finished, but they've more or less reached the finish line. But somehow they've kept running. And not only have they kept running, they've now picked up a small transsexual child. And they're running with said child screaming, but there's more.
Yes.
Now, that race in general, if you put that down into a timeline, it's not happening in a vacuum, as we discussed. The world is watching. Not just the world, the Caribbean is watching, and they're looking on, the conservative Caribbean person is looking on in horror. Because not only are they now, they're equating the gay rights movement to that particular part where you've made it past the finish line, but you somehow keep going. You're asking for more and more. It's coming into the slippery slope argument that a lot of conservatives in the Caribbean fear. But they're dragging the actual progress of what could be a gay rights movement in the Caribbean and the developing world down. It is negatively sending us, I say us, but you're in Madrid.
You're currently also
we are both currently in Madrid, but as of Tuesday, one of us has to return to the developing world. So we're being dragged back by the fake progress that the developed world is now aiming for. And that brings me to the next section, where the people that are, trying to form the Caribbean gay rights movement, where are they coming from or where they're getting their ideas from. And my theory is that they've entirely skipped most of the North American narrative and they're fast forwarding to the finish line, which is what is causing this slippery slope market.
This version of the finish line.
Of the timeline, you know.
It's not my preferred version of the finish line, but their view, yes.
They're skipping steps. And because they've skipped steps, they're terrifying the people who live in the region. So we're not going for we're not having a stone wall. We're not fighting for drag capabilities or drag inclusion or anything. We've skipped that. We haven't even gotten gay marriage. No island.
Mostly Caribbean. Some of the Caribbean still has anti-buggery laws.
Still have anti-buggery laws. The only ones that even have a sample of gay marriage are the ones that have been chained to Europe and so far have been either forced or have decided, we might as well. But the actual English-speaking Caribbean, hell no.
Independent Caribbean,
the sovereign Caribbean, it hasn't happened. And it's not going to happen because that's not what the movement here is pushing for. So what we're getting here now is basically anger some people. We got liberal students going overseas, studying, coming back, and they've completely forgotten where in that race the Caribbean is. They're at the finish line. They think the Caribbean should now be at the finish line. They think the Caribbean has the social maturity to be at the finish line, not aware that we haven't even started the conversation on what marriage is. What does marriage look, what a civil union looks like.
Again, some countries haven't even gotten to the point where they say that, it actually should not be legal to have gay sex. We are at such different levels of policy that it is, if it wasn't so sad, it would be hilarious.
Now, as a result of this skipping steps, which is odd because everyone in the Caribbean is aware of this phrase, show you're working. The LGBTQ, the gay groups in the Caribbean are not showing.
Sorry, this is cut you off. Another issue of the LGBT alphabet soup is that I can find the conceptual framework to have a T inside, but a Q. How is Q even remotely relevant? Q, you're not gay if you're in the Q by definition. So it's like, how is that now with sexuality? Anyway, but I know I don't want to go too far, but the Q just is always even more frustrating than the T in many ways. Continue.
We're not here to bash, but I'm not here to bash, folks. Rashid has pitchfork and torch in hand already. But the T does have historical precedence. Like the initial movement was transsexuals, etc. There is some historical precedence for why the T seems to have like an honorary place there.
It wasn't there actually historically. That's very new.
Why it's been placed, why it's been added. Why it's been added.
That's very new.
Now, the Q is being treated like some sort of catch-all.
Which is absurd. Which
is a bit odd because it's also encouraging the obfuscation.
Is Q question or Q query? Because that's where it also, because sometimes it was questioning, then it was also some people is queer, but it's too Q sometimes questioning.
But if it's either, it's doing the same thing.
It is, because also if you are questioning, maybe you will eventually enter, to use the term, community, but by definition you're not in it. So why are you even have some kind of representation in the...
Let's not even invite... Yeah. Let's not invite the semantics police. Let's not invite the gay semantics police to storm in on this. What we're getting at here, what the meat of the situation is that, one, the people who are in the conversation in the Caribbean right now are probably not... They have exposure to the wrong part of the timeline.
Yes, correct.
In gay rights development. And this brings me to the more pertinent question. Where are the people that we need to have this conversation? Enter the aforementioned DC gay.
Yeah. A lot of time, as you mentioned, the people who usually take the step, and in some ways, it is a fairly brave thing to do, to be a public face of what we used to call gay rights in the Caribbean, which is not actually called that anymore. To be some kind of public face of that, it does require some kind of bravery, sometimes also narcissist, but I will go in the good camp, I say bravery. And oftentimes these people, very recently, have direct educational exposure to the US, to the UK, to Canada, for example, and they join the communities in those jurisdictions and imbibe what they are speaking in that context. And then they go back to the Caribbean and just pick up from there and carry on. But they don't reassess and realize, oh, wait a minute, I switched context on that plane. I have to reassess what's going on so to actually speak to what's happening here. But they don't actually care about change. That's a harsh thing to say, Rashid, yes, I know. But when you speak to the people, often, again, not everyone, people calm down, but many of them that have this public persona, when you speak to them, they do not really care for changing opinions where they live. They care about saying you, meaning the average Caribbean citizen, are a bigot. You are actually probably even evil. And what I am always right and you are always wrong. And you can't have a productive conversation if you want to have a conversation from those premises. And that is something over and over again.
The demands, I dare say the demands are too great. The demands that they return from the developed world with, from their Oxfords and their demands are now too great.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's undeserved because the struggle that the other organizations have had to endure before reaching that point, you skipped it.
Yeah, you don't struggle.
You haven't struggled. And because of this hard-leaning, hyper version of progress that they've got in their minds, they're out of sync. They're not realistic anymore. They're actually alienating a subset of the gay, we're not going to call it community, diaspora. They're actually, because at the end of the day, let's be perfectly honest. The they, them with pink hair is not changing legislation.
Yes, that's correct.
It's going to be a boring, degular Bernice with her lesbian couple who happens to have a space in Congress or on the Senate, or a business owner who's eventually going to be the one to go, guys, we're losing money over this shit.
They do have gay couples that have appeals in court and things like that.
That's what happened in Barbados and Trinidad, etc.
Yeah, that stuff does work. But at the same time, when you see that thing happen, again, it does work often, not always, but often. There is this unnecessary backlash from the society, the call-in programs, the TV, the person on the street, because when you give a little too much comes, it's a slippery slope argument. Because they are seeing the Pride Parade in Boston, when you have the very young children watching men in thongs with dog masks on a parade, waving them down the street. That might sound like some harsh stereotype, but I was at Boston Pride. I've still my eyes. So people see that and they think that's what will happen in the Caribbean.
Media is everything. Media is how the Caribbean consumes the external stimulus to the rest of the world. They're not seeing the conversation that the United States is having, which is, should children even be there? That's the conversation the States is having. The States is not, the people in the United States are not arguing, let's bring our kids to watch guys in dogs.
No, some are.
Some
are, to be clear, in the very coastal areas.
But that's the conversation they're having. That's the conversation. That's where they're at. We haven't even gotten to the part where we should be safely having a Pride Parade.
Sure, if the Pride Parade was just literally some kind of austere event, there would not really be a big backlash against it.
What I'm saying is the United States has reached that point where this is the thing that they're discussing now. This is not the window by which we should be judging the Caribbean side of things. We haven't gotten there yet. We can't have that discussion yet. We can't have that discussion.
But you're forcing the discussion to happen
on an unread population and then being outraged at this population, which you are aware just in the past few...
But to be clear, it's not that the gay groups can help that. This is what's happening in Boston, in SF, in New York, in Toronto. But you see it on TV. You can't tell them turn off the TV. That's not the real gay. Those are gay people having gay parades. The problem is that is the point of why it's a contentious issue and what's the end of gay rights. even there. Because if that is what you portray as the end of gay rights, when countries like Barbados and Jamaica, Uganda, Kenya see that, like, oh, that is what they're going to do here in this country when the rights are given. Because that is the demonstration of what the end of gay rights looks like in Boston, New York, and Toronto. And that's part of the really heavy burden that these Western liberal societies have put on thinking about and calling gay rights in the Caribbean.
Is the unfortunate burden they've also placed on their developing neighbors to figure it out. But also our problem right now is, where do we find the counter voice to go, no, that's not what we're aiming for. We don't want to get there. Where's the sensible person to go, you know what? We don't have that gun problem. We don't have those gun problems. We have sensible laws. We can work our way towards a common baseline where everybody has the inclusivity and the rights without having children at a private rate. Like we just said, the DC gay is not here. In fact, they leave. They tend to leave or just live in a bubble apart from the rest of society. Let's face it, a lot of the most powerful gay individuals in the Caribbean, Barbados is particularly prone to this. They do segregate themselves from the rest of the community. In fact, they tend to not even involve themselves with these smaller organizations that are trying to coagulate into a sort of movement. They're not a part of that. They're not becoming the face of that. They're not campaigning for that. And even if we're not seeing it, like nothing's happening really. In other words, there's no one controlling the narrative. There's no one at the helm.
In many ways, I don't think you can really control the narrative when it's so against you. Because you can't put the Boston Parade back in the box. That's not going to happen. But the thing you mentioned about the whole DC, I love how we're using the category DC gay.
It's a word now. It's a thing now.
DC gays do exit. They exit the conversation. And they exit because, in many ways, I have my thing. The people that fought for the rights, they were right. We won them. Let me go about my non-gay business.
But in the case of the Caribbean, the DC gay is the one that's, I've won my individual freedom. I'm out.
Yeah, that's also an issue. I'm not going to say I'm a hypocrite. I think I'm going
to say you are. Where are we right now?
No, but it's not being hypocritical, okay? Right? It's just doing the thing that happens with this event. So I'm a gay man from the Caribbean, from Barbados. I left Barbados because there are not many rights there. But also, there are other things, of course. But then I'm married, I have a house, I have a good job, I have good hobbies and so on. I've become that kind of very standard DC gay in many ways. And I'm very sure there are many people in that from Barbados, I'll be like, he can do that. That's cool. He has a normal, again, my fingers are getting entire air quotes, but he has a normal life. Why can't I have that? But of course, they don't see me. I grant that. But it's probably a problem. Because I do have this, it means I really don't need to be in this squabbles, to put it very crudely, of all of these kind of gay events that happen in Barbados, which are led primarily by these radical activists.
And essentially you leave and it is no longer your problem.
It is unfortunate. I do get that. But at the same time, people have lives.
Life goes on. Life goes on. And I don't know if there are any studies on this. We always talk about the brain drain. What about the gay drain?
It's a good question. Because oftentimes, as you would know,
the intelligent people are gay.
Yes. So there are studies on that particular point. By the way, there is actually an entire book about DC gays called The Gay City, which is because, again, DC is a very gay city, but it's never thought of as a gay city.
It's the capital first.
No, it's whatever it is, but it's not a gay city. No one thinks, what's the main gay cities in the US? They're never going to mention DC.
It's always San Francisco first.
It's San Francisco, it's New York, it's Atlanta maybe, it's Miami, but it's never DC, right? DC is just something else. But it's a very gay place. Anyway, so there is a book actually on DC gays, funny enough, called The Gay City. And it's about this actual issue. So a lot of very smart men, or women boys, but men now, they often have to leave their city because of different gay homophobia issues that were very prevalent and still are in many places. And they know the only way of escape is actually good education, a good job, gotta get out far away. Same in the Caribbean. A lot of very smart people who leave the Caribbean are gay men because that was the real way to escape. So it is substantially unfortunate also when the brain drain is also a big part of gay drain as well in Caribbean. So people that will become, let's say, the less radical activists, to be frank, people like me, we leave. And we leave for a bucket of reasons. But that is an issue because now the people who are remaining in the Caribbean for various other reasons, they don't get access to people like me, for example. And I do find that in some ways that does weigh heavy sometimes, but at the same time, it's like that's life you gotta live. And in my view, the end is I live in Madrid, I live in Spain, where there's no real pressure to have a good gay life in these cities. Yes, they have radical activists too, and that's a whole Western problem, but in the Caribbean, it's obviously more acute.
In other words, we're lacking role models.
I think so.
We are increasingly, as we have discussed in some articles on cpsi.media, self-plug, wing, wing, nudge, nudge, the Caribbean is seeing an outflow of people. And this is just one of the factors that exacerbates that problem over time. Barbados has not seen positive migration since it has become a country. Yeah, despite attempts to stem that outflow through things like the welcome stamp. It's not working because why would a gay person come here and have less rights?
Yeah, exactly.
I do know one couple in particular, they're already married. They're in a bubble. The welcome stamp does allow people to live in a bit of a bubble.
No, money allows that.
Which you have to get a welcome stamp. Like, you can't come here poor.
Yeah.
We can't come here poor. I'm going back there poor. I got a problem. But the fact of the matter is, the Caribbean does not foster a place where anyone in their right mind who is even remotely gay would want to stay. The people that do get away, literally cut it off.
Yeah, the homophobia is very grating. It's literally not possible to have family legally for a gay man in all the Caribbean, except Cuba, but they have other issues. And the homophobia is so grating that you need to leave for various reasons. And the Caribbean is very homophobic.
So homophobic, in fact, that there's Uganda levels of homophobia.
It's not Uganda. Yeah.
It's not Uganda, guys. But I think there's a similar level of hopelessness. I was hoping to avoid this word.
We can't avoid the word.
But we can't avoid it. The hopelessness prevents the Caribbean from seeing any return of the DC gay. Because the Caribbean being in the mire, the stagnation that it is, not just on gay policy, but policy in general, this complete lack of dynamism is forcing individuals who do escape to do a double take when it comes to contributing back. And because of that, the DC gay vanishes into the sunset, into DC. They vanish there. They're in Madrid. They're in London. And now the Caribbean problem becomes so other that they don't even identify anymore as associated with that. And what you're left, and what we've concluded is, as the filter of reasonable level-headed individuals just seeps out of the Caribbean, you just get a concentration of the crazies.
Yes, correct.
You're just left with, and this is no offense to anyone who's dyed their hair, there's a stereotype now. There is a stereotype. You guys are producing the stereotype that every conservative church group, etc., is going to beat you over the head with, because there's no diversity really left in the activist pool. And now you're the image of everything that is wrong with the movement.
And so now we have a clash. Now we have this tango of radical gay accelerationism, which is the concentration of the radical activists in the Caribbean who are primarily either all literally educated in the UK or the US or Canada or so on, or just imbibe so much US media that they think they live in Boston. Plus, the international organizations from those countries that fund the radical activists back in the Caribbean. And you were at an event recently, right?
Oh, which one?
The UN one.
Oh.
What were some of the main topics discussed there at this gay rights event? I believe it was called that, right?
It was interesting.
In Barbados, yes.
In Barbados, it was interesting. They were trying to determine what resources, because let's face it, funding is drying up. Funding is actually drying up for a lot of organizations. But the event was mainly about getting more funding and getting resources, creating a framework, like infrastructure, a platform for persecuted gays to be able to look to these organizations. And they were going to do this they have no support of the DC gays. They don't have that support base at all. And they themselves now are dealing with a PR issue. They have an image problem. And just following those Pride events, after that event and everything, they had the Pride parade, which was just a couple dozen people marching along the streets, etc. And what jumped out to me is the media reporting on it, and then what was actually happening in the comment section.
Explain.
The media goes, Pride Parade goes off. It basically goes off without a hitch. The person writing the article is trying to be as objective as possible. They're saying things like, goes off without a hitch, Barbados hosted blah, 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 individuals from this way, came in. The comments basically reinforce what I said earlier. Steps were skipped. And badly so. You can't come back from the United States assuming that we've done everything where we deserve a pride parade when the state doesn't even recognize why you're having this parade. The state doesn't recognize it. The general population is clueless as to what you're really talking about. They don't care. What they know is that you did this on a Sunday. There's a reason you did this. Was not going to be able to go off on any other day, which kind of diminishes the entire impact they were aiming for. It goes off on a Sunday. For any context listeners, Barbados basically shuts down on Sundays. So they had this pride parade through the city on a Sunday with a couple dozen people, a truck playing some music, a couple members of the trans community and whatnot, waving flags, etc. The sole news outlet on the island posts it as an update, and then the population tears it to shreds in the comments. They're like, fire for this, fire bun. Like, what is this? Take this back. And the most common narrative you're seeing is, this is America's fault. You guys need to take this back where you got it. Now, on one hand, wow. On the other hand, they're not wrong about where we got it. That's where it came from. There hasn't been a trial of any kind on marriage. There hasn't been any attempt to bring civil unions. Heck, the Constitution, some of these organizations are struggling to get the Constitution to even acknowledge that they exist. Barbados' Constitution, we became a republic back in 2021. It is now 2024, and there's no Constitution written to define this republic, or at least the rights within this republic. And one of the things that is stalling this new constitution is because they want to include a line that goes regardless of race, creed, or sexual orientation. You haven't even managed that part yet. But you had a pride parade?
I'm not sure I am categorically opposed to the idea of a pride parade. And the pride parades in Caribbean for various, hopefully all of these reasons, are not as wild as anything in North America. Not even approaching that kind of wildness. And in a country where it is extremely homophobic, the idea of a pride parade does have, in some sense, some salience.
Don't get me wrong. I do believe that is something we should be able to have at some point to celebrate that. But at the same time, keep in mind the pride parade. The phenomenon of the pride parade now has the worst PR associated with it in most of the island's mind. When they see a pride parade, they're seeing the kids on the side. What I'm trying to say is, find something else.
Yeah, it also is something, because the country also is so small, you don't need a pride parade to form like a quote-unquote safe space. You don't need that, because you can get the people to a particular location at any point in time without having some public triggering. That's true.
Barbados is not a big parade place anyway. We don't have we have two major parades a year. Kadooment, which is less of a parade, more of a street party, and Independence Day. And to be very honest, the Independence one has declined because there's less alcohol. It's declined quite a bit. Yeah. It's moved from being through the city now. Sometimes it's hosted by the garrison.
Yeah, fine. In that context, I would say, yeah, there's no actual purpose.
The mere fact that nobody is sitting there and going, maybe a parade is not the best, means they're stuck in the American mold. They think that in order for we to be legitimate, we have to have a parade. Yeah. And I'm like, is there any other way that you could shout that you're here than having a kind of tone-deaf, ignored parade through an empty city?
Yes, true. It's very self-referentially absurd.
Yeah, it's like you're parodying. At this point, you're parodying and you're not gaining any followers, because the only people who now agree with you are the people that were already on board.
Yeah.
You haven't encouraged, the whole point is pride. Are you instilling pride? Not really, because only a couple dozen people showed up.
Right.
You're not going to get people who are in the closet to come show up to this parade. Your allies are not even going to come out to this parade, because this parade is so small that any one person can now be identified and picked out and probably be discriminated against.
I guess people that turn up don't care because they're already...
The pink-haired extremists.
Yeah, they're extremists.
Not extremists. Guys, we're not labeling you as extremists, but you look like Wow. you by elimination, you become the extremists. The DC gay is not there.
No, they're quite far away on vacation.
They're about 6,000 kilometers away, sitting opposite me right now.
But this does really drive the question of what, under circumstances where you have so much, let's face it, negative portrayal of, you have so much negative portrayal of what is called gay men. Because let's be clear, a lot of the Pride Parade isn't about gay men in the explicit sense. It's about all kind of different sexual categories that are not always gay. Oftentimes not gay at all. And how do you work in that context where you're in a developing country and you have to try to claim that won't happen here? We are a different crivel. They don't say that because they don't believe it. It is part of the radical extreme thing. They don't believe it. They expect and want that kind of radical nature of the Pride Parade to come to the Caribbean. They want a Caribbean beach Pride Parade that's like Boston, which is quite, let's just say, is quite a toxic event. And because of that, and plus you don't have the, let's call it moderate, sensible gay men in the Caribbean. If they even live in the Caribbean, they never participate in those events, and the other ones just leave entirely. And how do you moderate that? That is the struggle. I don't know how one squares off, and that to me is a very deep problem. And I do think it's a question one has to talk a lot more about.
The DC gays are stumped. Some of them are stumped. Maybe many heads together could bring about this some sort of solution, but I think the first step is understanding why you can't use the exact same approach as your American and European counterparts in this particular struggle.
The approach is somewhat similar. Okay, so this is why I still use the word DC gay, SF gay. Although they're very American-centric terms, I do think really the global progress of gay rights is an American invention, which is something that should be lauded for and celebrated in many deep philosophical, practical, sociological, all kind of ways. America needs to get a lot of props for this progress. Yes, European countries did have gay marriage first, but the real global push was really an American thing. And in many ways, I do wish American foreign policy did have much more concrete, contextual foreign policy to actually try to drive more change in the rest of the world when it comes to gay rights. But the way how it's approached, for example, the US Embassy in Barbados flying the Pride flag, or I guess the old Pride flag based on current events during their Pride month, that could go a long ways. I don't think it should have happened, but the ways how they should actually be helping, they don't help because the gay rights movement in that country has come to a chaotic end in terms of a public perception. Because again, they have this other problem. They have this extreme, toxic, chaotic system where it's being taken over by radical queer theorists, essentially, that think this is some different new thing, push and push. So let's say more elegant contextual foreign policy for developing countries on gay rights can't happen because the people who would do it, they exit, right? They do work in DC, but they exit any kind of gay things. So I really do think we live in a conundrum.
A rather complicated one of that. Now that the DC gays, I'm going to keep calling them that forever. Now that the DC gays have exited, what you're left with are people that don't know when to put down the axe. They don't know how to put down the battle axe.
It's the extreme SF gays. The extreme SF gays are people who not only do they not, I don't think it's simple as they don't want to, they don't know how to. They don't want to put down the battle axe. Remember,
I spent my entire life campaigning, you best believe.
But it's not only the people, no, it's not only those kinds. For example, you have many people many SF gays who do not like the idea of even having a monogamous or even a monogamish relationship. There are many who have never even had a long-term monogamish or monogamous relationship. There are many who scorn the idea of marriage. There are many who will never adopt children. There are many who are very content in just circuit partying from Mykonos to Fire Island and back every year until they die. The problem is that those people are adults and they can do what they want, but they chose this. And because they chose this, there is no way to come to a point where you can move from the extreme of the distribution to the center. So you always have now to push the extreme further out, because as you go, extremes eventually tend towards the center. You have to make sure the tendency doesn't come too close to the center, because it would really mean you are the outcast. You are the outlier. But no, they want to be part of a system where they are not an outlier. So you have to always keep pushing further away from the actual mean. That is the issue there. So now you're not gay anymore, because that's too basic. That's too central. That's too, you know what? That happened. That is done. We understand that. No, I'm queer now.
We have reached the slippery slope that everyone was fearing. North America and Europe have reached the slippery slope that everyone was fearing because of a loud minority. Is that the loud minority?
I don't even know if it's a minority. That's part of the issue. It's hard to, it's so hard.
A loud
it's
subset,
so hard.
a loud subset of the smattering, not even community, the smattering, the diaspora is now trying to make their own personal depravity everyone else's.
Again, I'm a big fan of personal depravity once it's all consensual adults.
But it's supposed to
stay
really
personal.
Exactly. There's this meme on the internet, bring back shame.
I'm a big fan of that.
But not just bring back shame. I feel like we could all do with knowing a little less about each other. There's no problem. It's not in the closet. It's called being reasonable.
Exactly.
It's like they've hijacked these, what were once legitimate movements, and are now pushing narratives that endanger everything the previous movements have worked so hard to put in place. But let's pause that for a moment. This entire conversation, we've been focusing on the Caribbean looking to the North as a role model. Do you think they ever look to the South?
No.
Because America has had some rather free states for a while. There's Colombia. It's right there.
Yeah, Colombia has gay marriage.
Not just gay, it's got trans rights.
In many ways.
It's this weird thing, the Caribbean, particularly Barbados, I don't know if you've ever noticed it before. This is a odd segue, but I need to mention it. Where we like to pretend that it's never been done before. Have you ever seen that? The government of Barbados will often pretend as though it is in uncharted waters and it's never been done before.
Like building new homes, yes.
No, that's definitely uncharted for them. They're never going to get that done. But do you remember the whole COVID pandemic where the WHO was lauding Barbados for its innovative approach to pandemic management, even though all Barbados did was stay open, and then when it realized everybody else had shut down around it, it went, okay, fine, we'll do it. And the government of Barbados commonly pretends as though the country is a lot bigger than it really is. You remember we were talking about how nimble such a small state. The whole reason the cpsi exists is because we believe there's still hope for these very small states to correct course, because they don't have massive populations. They don't have giant governments that require so many cogs that it's all gunked up and we have to go clean it out. There are actual tangible policies that can be put into effect to correct the ship. The governments of these islands do not pretend they don't believe that is the case.
Correct.
They think they're so massive that they've gone so far down, and they like to hide behind 300 years of stability. That's what Barbados hides behind when it comes to any sort of policy change. Parliament has been there for 375 years. We're not going to let you come and change that. They like to pretend as though the current parliament is some sort of continual descendant of the original plantocracy. Air quotes, I'm fanning you now. I'm fanning you. And as a result, even our government is not complicit in allowing that narrative to just run wild and free. Let's not beat around the bush here. We have a head of state. No, not head of state. We have a head of government who is, for all intents and purposes, allegedly, because I'm about to go home to this country, you're not about to get me sued, Rashid, allegedly a part of the gay diaspora. Still not saying community. She's there. She's in it. I don't know if, again, she might be one of the most prominent cases of a DC gay I've ever seen.
Which is the most, when you hear that out loud, it's the most ironic thing ever.
It is, because it also explains why she does not care.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing, yeah.
She has no reason to. When the time comes, she's going to hop on a regional security jet and fly off to go campaign in Brussels with the other DC gay.
That's true. Literally, yes.
When she's finished with her tenure, notice I haven't called her name yet, because again, you are not catching me. You're not going to catch me slipping, Rashid. When she's finished here, she has a really nice job waiting for her at maybe the WHO or the World Bank with the other DC gays.
Again, true.
There's a golden parachute. Maybe government is the way. Are you here?
That's what they did, DC.
Maybe government is the way. You can ascend and float off like a flower away from this toxic island if you just get into government.
Yeah, the irony is a bit too harsh for me. But yeah.
It's smacking me dead in the face. I'm going back Tuesday.
So you have this issue. And again, given we are at CPSI, I want to say these things because I do think there is hope and a way to change it. But you need to acknowledge the problems as they exist and not how you want them to exist. And we don't do that enough.
We're too gay. That's the problem. That's the problem with right now. It's too gay. It's too gay for the islands to even look. It's so gay. It's pink hair. It's piercings everywhere. And we literally just got out of women can vote.
Yeah, it definitely is a tricky thing because now the concept of gay has shifted so far.
The finish line has moved and it's in a position that a lot of people in the region are just not comfortable crossing anymore.
I actually don't even know if in a generation they can even reach the finish line. This has moved so far ahead.
Enough damage has been done to the image that all I can offer, of course, the CPI, we're going to work on this. We're going to be working on this.
Next year, we're doing a lot more of the gay rights type focused Caribbean policy stuff.
Caribbean Progress Studies Institute. That's our job right there. We're going to be working on this. This is for us as well. We're going to have to try something else. The solution here is to find another solution to this problem because, guys, the Pride Parade ain't working.
Shem, we have come to our time. I definitely think we'll be getting back to this topic on another episode. And also, I should recommend people to check out Shem's podcast, Disgruntled Musings, also by cpsi.media. And you can find it wherever you find your podcast. And starting in the fall, we are going to be also doing more YouTube. We have some other fellows that will be setting up with YouTube as well. So we have some more videos and some more activity via that kind of media. And I think this was at least a provocative conversation. I hope in some ways it was productive, but definitely provocative, which sometimes you need that too. And Shem, that will be our episode today, and we will catch up on this topic in a few months.
See you next time, Rashid.
That's it for this episode. For updates about the podcast, please subscribe to our Substack blog found on cpsi.media. You can also read our newsletters and long-form content on Caribbean policy improvements.